Making disciples is the primary mission of God's church, and he uses the spiritual disciplines to transform us to be like Jesus, in other words, disciples. This week, my guest is Bishop Lawrence Ward. He's the senior pastor at Abundant Life Church in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He's a leader in his denomination. He's also a member of the Board of VNE New England, and we'll be talking about work as a spiritual discipline. I'm Charles Galda, president of VNE New England, and your host for the Church in Action. Bishop Ward, thanks for being with us again.
Hi, Charles. Thanks for having me on today and talk about this powerful and wonderful subject today.
So now, folks who may not remember the last time you were on or may not know you, can you give us a little bit of biography for yourself and Abundant Life?
Well, first of all, I'm a native Bostonian, been in Boston all my life, and I've just loved New England. My parents are from New England as well. Well, we are descended from Barbados, West Indies, and my dad pastored Abundant Life Church for 28 years. He wasn't the founding pastor. Church is 105 years old, started in 1917. And so being a PK along with my two sisters, we have grown to be in church all of our lives. Gave my life to the Lord at the age of 18 and found a place where God was really tugging at my heart to really serve him. And I really had a passion for industrial arts and engineering. And really, I was actually called to pastor as I was serving in engineering fields, working for Raytheon Company, working for Lord Electric Company, contracting firms, doing all types of electrical estimating and that kind of work that I was doing. But so far, as the Lord has blessed and I've become pastor and a leader in our denomination as well. It's been now, my goodness, 28 years and serving the Lord in a capacity of leadership. And it's certainly been a joy to do that.
Yeah, I think about us in the same boat sometimes. Neither one of us are supposed to be in vocational ministry. We're both supposed to be in the corporate world, but God had a different plan. And so, and maybe a little bit about Abundant Life. And so you mentioned it was in 1917. And so can you fill in a little bit more about what Abundant Life is?
Abundant Life is a church where we are committed to, our motto is a church where faith and life connect. We're a holistic discipleship ministry. And what our goal is that we want to not only preach the gospel, see people give their lives to Christ, but how does it work in everyday life? How do you take your faith into your home, into your marriage, into your relationships, into your workplace? As a student, how do you live for Christ as a student and find your calling, find your giftings, and understand the uniqueness of what God has made you to be, and for the purpose that He wants you to fulfill in this world. And so, holistic discipleship is really a part of what we do. We're really focusing on generations, and we have a great what I call a mixture of generations across the board, from our boomers all the way down to, as you kind of Generation Alpha. And we're really seeing God do some things among us as a congregation, and it's just marvelous to see.
Yeah, I love the vernacular you're using about whole life discipleship, because it suggests to me this notion of you're taking the Sunday morning and other things you do, and it's really about equipping people to be outside the church walls, as opposed to sometimes a retreat into the church walls where I get ministered to on Sunday or when I'm there. And then there can start to be a separation in our lives. Is that what you're trying to bridge?
That is correct. Integration is all a part of discipleship. I think that, when Jesus came, he didn't come to give us church and give us programs. He came to give us life, abundant life. And it's important that we understand, as his creation, that he wants to express himself through every aspect of our lives and in our relationships and all the things that we do and how we are called to be in this present world. So sometimes as I grew up in church, I had this kind of angst where church was on Sunday and as you gathered, it was a powerful time in God's presence. You saw your community, but then after you left, what connection did that really have to being in as a college student or being a high school student? And fortunately, my parents, who were committed Christians, they really taught me how to live my faith and the importance of living my faith outside of the four walls. But often that wasn't taught a lot. That wasn't really communicated. It was communicated, come to church, be a part of the life of the church, but never really connecting how you lived your daily life outside of the faith community as the scattered church.
Yeah, it's a subtle difference, and we sometimes miss we're not doing those things, right? We just kind of fall into the way we do church and kind of miss that it's got to have this integration is a great word to use on it. Yeah, we've been talking about this whole notion of making disciples, spiritual formation, and we talk about God uses most typically the spiritual disciplines to transform us to be more like Jesus, which is our calling. And so would you agree with that formulation?
Absolutely. Spiritual disciplines are um, to cause us to have a transformed life. It really is the integration. I call it training. You don't go to the gym just to lift. You go to the gym because hopefully, as you do the disciplines of what you need to do at the gym, it will transform the physical parts of your body. And so I see that as a very important part of spiritual development. Without the development part of our souls, our spirits, and how we act and conduct ourselves, there's going to be a disconnect to what we call, hey, I received Christ, I have a relationship with Christ, but what does that mean in the transformation of what you're doing and who you are?
Yeah, sometimes we miss it, right? Like the "What would Jesus do?" movement from years back would talk about, well, in that situation, I have to do what Jesus would do, and I'm going to stop and I'm going to think about it. But without the practice to get ready for that moment, it's like I just show up on game day.
Exactly, exactly. And it's relationship, and what you're learning in discipleship is that once you have a relationship with Jesus, now the question is, are you submitting your life to him and dedicating your life to him? Are you going into a process of sanctification, as we would call it? um, and how does that process working to transform your life, to transform your thinking, transform the way you interact with the public, transform how you serve, and transform how you raise your children? And what does that really mean in all of it? So we're all becoming, we're all transforming. I have not arrived. There's still work to do in my own personal life, so I'm still on this road to transformation.
But now, for most of us, if we believe the data that's out there, we basically think there's two spiritual disciplines, right? Prayer and Bible reading, and most of us don't do those. So in our research, we found there's a problem with how we're making disciples. And I think there's this awareness piece of it's the disciplines that transform us, but then there's the pathways into doing the disciplines, if you will. And not everybody will be willing to do it, but it's this notion that that transformation you're talking about, the disciplines play that role, and we're not doing them. We see too few disciplines, and we don't do those. Is that a fair critique?
Yes, it is. And I just my own experience. That is really what was taught to me. That Bible study, prayer is really the foundations of your spiritual disciplines. But also learned about fasting, the importance of denying yourself the food so that you can focus more on intentionally on having a moment in relationship and strengthening that time with God. I got a book, and I'm sure that some and many people know what it is. This is this book on spiritual disciplines. It's a discipline handbook that really goes through a number of spiritual disciplines that to implement in one's life. Just thinking about silence, rest, uh, rhythms of how you're actually going through life. And sometimes our life is so busy and we're so fast moving that we're not taking time to really nurture our souls and to just enjoy moments with God and moments with creation and moments with people. These are all spiritual disciplines.
And we need to be careful that we don't attribute, and you're not doing it, of course, but that we don't attribute it's the discipline that changes us. It's that God works in the discipline. But can you flesh that a little bit? What's happening when we do silence and solitude and Bible study and fast? What's happening that God is able to use it to change us?
Well, first, in my experience, slowing down is a difficult thing for me. Slowing down, because of the way I'm wired. My mind is going constantly, always thinking about the next thing or the conversation I just had or a situation that I need to address. It's very difficult sometimes just to slow down. And plus, now you have social media and you have texts and you have emails. Those will all make it even more difficult. But by having a spiritual discipline of just solitude, of just having moments where you intentionally stop, pause, and take that breath and really just sit down for a moment to listen. Because prayer is also listening to God. It's not always having you talk to Him and just say, Lord, I'm just going to sit here and listen and just be quiet and allow myself just to key in and quiet my spirit and quiet my heart. It's that passage of scripture of learning, be still and know that I'm God. Be still. And that helps to quiet my mind, quiet my anxieties. It helps me to reframe perhaps a conversation that I might have that might be upsetting. To look at the world and appreciate people around me differently, and to have some compassion and empathy and looking at things differently as I experienced them myself. And so those spiritual disciplines have proven valuable time and time again as I practice them. And also, I have limits. I have just recognized when I need to stop because I do have limits. And I know that it has changed my viewpoint since I was a young man. I thought it was like, boy, you're invincible. You can do anything. Oh, yeah, yeah. Yes, just go for it. And now that I'm much more seasoned in age, of life, I
Wise.
realize that the world does not need me to run. God does not need me to run the world. He just needs me to do my part. And I recognize that my limitations and I need to depend on Him.
And I've been connecting two verses in my own study lately. The whole Exodus 34 part, where Moses is going into the tent of meeting and he's with God and he's visibly transformed. And then Paul is talking about now now we with unveiled faces are being transformed from glory to glory by spending time as looking with the Lord as looking in a mirror. I'm taking those to mean that just like Moses is transformed by being in the presence of God, and we're doing the disciplines, we're spending time in the presence of God as opposed to being discipled by Facebook and being discipled by Hollywood and being discipled by our music, and we're being transformed just focusing on the things of God in His presence. Is my exegesis okay on that?
It is. I mean, it's really an opportunity to encounter God's presence.
Mm,
The encountering God's presence is a very important part because it is a foundation, even from Genesis, that Adam actually in that garden he was one who experienced God's presence in the cool of the day, and there is times when we need to stop and just refocus and what it is to worship and what it is to connect with God throughout the day.
yeah. And so, how do you define spiritual discipline?
I would say that spiritual disciplines is really about um, having a process by which trains you. It trains you and gives you a pathway so that transformation can happen. Now I know that's kind of a long, maybe a long explanation of it, but I look at it where um, Timothy was told, by Paul, there are some instructions that I'm giving to you. He was raised by a grandmother and a godly mother, godly grandmother. And Paul is mentoring Timothy. Um, and he tells him that it's important that he should train himself to be godly. That's a very important part of this whole idea of discipleship, to train yourself to be godly. Um, Many times we try to be godly, but we don't train. If you really want to do something well, you have to be trained. So discipline is part of that training. Anything that we do over and over again gives us the capacity and the strength to be able to perform at an optimum level. But it's not just the discipline itself that you're after. You're after the transformational to what it does for you. Um, and so when I think about this whole idea of discipleship and what that means and what it does for us, um, spiritual disciplines is really about training yourself to be godly.
And I love the athletic metaphor you've come back to now on this is we it takes work, right? There's effort we have to expend. It doesn't save us, right? But there's effort we have to expend for God to use this. And what it bumps up for most of us is it bumps up against I can watch TV effortlessly. I can watch social media effortlessly. And so I'm lazy and I don't see that same athletic metaphor relating to my spiritual stuff. So I just do what's easy as opposed to saying, no, I have in mind a goal and I have to exercise for it. I want to be changed. Presuming I do want to be godly, I want that goal. And now I need to put effort into making it happen.
Yes, there is some effort on our part. We need to make sure that as we look at Paul, he not only used a metaphor of being an athlete, he used a metaphor of being a farmer. If we want harvest, you have to sow seeds
Mm,
and you
right.
have to work the ground. Certainly you can't make the rain happen, but if you don't cultivate the ground, if you don't cultivate the soil, Jesus talked about that in Matthew 13 all the way through and said, hey, the seed has to fall on good ground in order for that seed to grow into something that's going to produce a plant and then be fruitful. He also talked about being a soldier. No soldier is going to be a good soldier if they continue to engage themselves in the civil affairs of life. He talked about it's important to have disciplines as a good soldier. And we know that being a soldier, they have to go to a camp. They have to go to learn how to handle, you know, artillery. They have to learn how to handle themselves on a battlefield. And this is not this warfare that we're in as well. This is being a Christian is warfare, and you're going to engage in spiritual battles. So, how are you going to be able to stand your ground, as Paul says in Ephesians chapter 6, if you have never implemented any spiritual disciplines?
It's a great point. Now you started your career full time in the marketplace. You're a pastor, but I know you still do stuff in the marketplace. And so let's shift a little bit to work, where most of us are spending our time in the marketplace, where we do our work. How does that factor into this whole conversation about being a disciple and spiritual disciplines?
Well, I think being a disciple is being a disciple, whether you are a pastor or leader, or you're a person who's working in for a company. Um, it's not this or that. It's you're a disciple of Jesus Christ.
Hmm.
I think what the communication has been over time is that there has been a separation of clergy and laity. I think we go about our disciplines, of course, in various ways, in various forms, whether it's taking a retreat or you are actually having some time of extended periods of fasting. But suffice to say, we're all disciples, and so when we carry our discipleship, as it were, or our faith into marketplaces, There is a need for every Christian to see that when you're at your job or you're at your workplace, that you are in the field. You're in the field, and that people, when they look at your life and they interact with you, do they see the light of Christ? Do they see Christ manifested in your work? Um, because work is also worship, and I guess we'll talk about that a little bit, because I don't view work as just work. Work is also part of our service to God, our worship, and we integrate uh, how we do our work and God's calling on our lives and our vocation when it comes to how we live our lives before others who don't know Him.
Can you expand upon that? Because I think that's a really important point. I think many of us think about work as I got to pay the bills. And maybe there's a level of which we agree, well, I can give to missions or I can give to the church through my work. How should we think about work and specifically connecting it back to worship, as you said?
Well, that's a good question. When thinking about it, I try to approach it where we need to make sure that we understand the narrative and how the narrative, meaning the story of the Bible, and how work integrates itself into that. Because basically there's four things I talk about. And it's not anything new, because these principles have been talked about for a long time. That there's four things when it comes to the narrative. One is creation, one is the fall, thirdly is redemption, and then there is consummation. So quickly, the first one is that when we talk about creation, creation is when God comes on the scene and He's now recreating or creating a world, a world that was in chaos, a world that was in darkness, and He's bringing shalom, He's bringing peace, He's bringing light, He's bringing life. But of course, the fall disrupts that, and we have a disruption where now everything is being affected, from the relationship that Adam and Eve have with the Lord, to even their work. And work has been disrupted, and now they're working, and now it's a little bit more toilsome, a little bit more burdensome. But then the story doesn't stop there. The story goes into redemption. The kingdom breaks in, and Jesus comes, and He breaks in, and He calls His ministry the work that He's doing. He gives Himself sacrificially on the cross to redeem us. And now there's a taste of the kingdom, as uh, Amy Sherman will call it, where He starts to heal the sick. He starts to heal broken hearts. He starts to minister to those who are considered the outcast of community, lepers. And as He's doing that, it's now they're tasting the healing that Jesus can bring through His ministry. So there's a redemption part of that. But then there's a consummation. Consummation is that all things are going to be new. And so work brings those aspects of redemption and newness to a creation that has been broken. And so when I have a doctor that is dealing with my body that has been broken by sin, that is a blessing or a taste of the kingdom that they offer for my healing. And so the kingdom is here, but it's not yet. But ultimately, when it comes, there'll be no need for doctors, because there'll be no more sickness, there'll be no more death, there'll be no more sorrow. But in the meantime, we're in a place where the work that people are doing, that is, under God, certainly this kind of bad work that's out there as well, but the good works that we can do as believers, we can let our light shine so that the kingdom can break in, and we can get a taste of what God has for us in the future.
Yeah, because there is the sense that God completed the work of creation, but then right away He invites us into the work of creation when He says, "Subdue, fill the earth and subdue it." And so we've got some work to do. And then, of course, the fall breaks more things, so there's more work that needs to be done, because we're supposed to be working to make it right. And
Absolutely.
and so is that the sense in which it connects to worship then?
It connects to worship because we are all in the process of, when we do our work, to really bring flourishing to communities and to people's lives. The word in in scripture, there's a Hebrew word called avodah. Avodah is a word that is a seamless word when it comes to worship, service, and work. So it's used in scripture in different ways, but it's like seamless between worship, service, and work. So what's this correlation is very interesting, that when you and I are working, we're not just working for a paycheck. We're not just, trying to get by, and help our organizations get a task done. We're actually engaged in work and service and worship, so that my worship unto God is carries more weight than just a worship service on Sunday, or singing a hymn, or being in a Sunday morning environment where we're worshiping, but it carries into my work, that I'm
Mhm.
worshiping unto God. I'm doing it unto God, not simply unto men.
Right. And if I'm called in general to serve and bless other people, that really should change my mindset going into work, because now the work I do is meant to serve and bless other people, not, to your point, not to get my paycheck necessarily, although that's a byproduct that's practical. But that really changes how I go into work, or it should.
It absolutely should. It absolutely should change our thinking, because, as Jesus said, you need to let your light so shine among mankind, or men, that the Lord, that your good works can be seen, and people can come to glorify the Father who's in heaven.
Mhm.
Uh, so even through our work's a witness to people. Um, I had a very interesting conversation at times when it comes to people who ask me, how do you really witness at work? How come, you can't really open your Bible and talk about Jesus, and you can't really, pray for people right on the spot as you're in the office and in the workplace? I said, well, how do you do your work? Um, do you vet do you do your work on time? Are you vigilant about your work? Are you accomplishing the goals in your workplace? How do you handle disappointment, and how do you handle
Mhm.
frustration when it comes to projects that you might be dealing with? Those are all ways in witnessing to others the light of Christ, because they may say, "Hey, why is it that you're not frustrated when there's a whole bunch of changes going on?" Oh, okay. Let me tell you why.
Yeah.
Because when I come in, I'm here not only to serve the organization, the company, those of you who work around me, but I also have a connection with the Lord. Would you like to hear about that?
Mhm. I have a friend who's a Christian business owner in Connecticut, and he always likes to say the best employees I have ever had were Christians, and the worst employees I ever had were Christians. Right? Because we can get it right, we can get it wrong. And so, yes, that's a great point. So, just 2 minutes left, Larry. What did I not ask you about that you think is important in this conversation?
That's a good question to ask. What didn't you ask? I think what is something that really connects with me is that, how do we break through the barrier
Mm,
of clergy and laity? How do we break through that barrier? What do we do as pastors? I have some ideas about that, to break through this barrier where people say, "Yeah, well, that's that whole discipline thing, and worship and all this. That's priestly. That's not anything to do with me. I'm a business person."
yeah.
Um, and how do we, as the church, really support entrepreneurs and business owners who are really influential and creative, and have a way of really bringing shalom to a community and transforming people's lives? How do we go beyond inviting them just to give to a benefit, or give to a fundraiser,
Yeah.
that they're ministers to, that they're people who God has sent and giving gifts to, that can really cause a community to be transformed for His glory. So those are some things that are really on my mind as we talk about worship, work, and spiritual disciplines and discipleship.
And those are good points worth fleshing out some more. So I'm going to ask you back for us to talk about that stuff if I can.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Larry, thanks so much for being with us. I appreciate it. God bless you for your ministry.
Well, thank you so much, Charles. I appreciate being on with you today, and Lord bless you as you do your work. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And I'd like to thank our producer, Jess Mangano, and listeners like you. This program is created by Vision New England, which helps people be the people of God, doing the work of God, making disciples, doing justice, and fostering unity in our communities so we can share Jesus and transform New England. You can find more resources and donate at visionnew.england.org. This program is brought to you by our friends at the Luis Palau Association, who are dedicated to proclaiming the good news, uniting the church, and impacting cities worldwide.